The state of higher education in South Africa is collapsing at an accelerated rate. As we warned as early as January, the government of the African National Congress has failed to plan for and resolve the generational enrollment crisis in South Africa. The racist National Party of Apartheid never wished to see an African child progress and succeed in education. It successfully suppressed all efforts and opportunities which would see African children educated. Through Bantu education, the black child was reduced to hard and exploitative labor. The racist vision of separate development is vividly expressed in the dog Hendrik Verwoerd's sentiments when he said, "There is no place for us black people in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor." He carried on to ask, what is the use of teaching the Bantu mathematics when it cannot use it in practice? It was therefore the vision of the racist apartheid Afrikaner regime to keep black children away from developed and sophisticated forms of labor and thought. They wanted to keep black children stuck in the generational curse of being their permanent domestic workers, their permanent garden boys, and their permanent mine and farm workers. It is for this reason that no provision was made to absorb the African child in post-secondary education. In black children, they did not see scientists, they did not see doctors, they did not see economists, lawyers, engineers, mathematicians, entrepreneurs, land and business owners. They wanted to keep us in mud schools, under-resource our teachers, and render us only employable by them in cheap forms of labor. But what angers us the most is that the former liberation movement, the ANC, now in government, has not addressed this generational curse. Today, 29 years on, we have students sleeping in libraries, sleeping in lecture halls, and sleeping outside the gates of campuses as there is not enough student accommodation. Today, 29 years on, our campuses have been turned into military zones as police and private security are used to intimidate, victimize, and silence students fighting for education. Today, 29 years on, student leaders are suspended without trial, shot at and even killed by those who claim to be their liberators. Today, 29 years on, money is used as a barrier to entry even for academically deserving students. 29 years on, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, 29 years on, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme kept student accommodation grants at 45,000, while universities and private accommodation providers go as high as 60 to 65,000 for accommodation. What type of a government concedes that this student is too poor to afford education by approving their application, then goes on to give the same student not enough money to cover the full cost of study? Because once NSFAS approves, it is a confirmation and acceptance from the state that this child cannot afford this education. This child should not be paying for education, yet the same government goes and gives too little and sometimes does not give at all. We also warned that the student debt crisis will be a recurring crisis in higher education. We warned that if student debt is not cancelled, many students will be left outside the system, disallowed to register, and damned to a life of poverty, economic inactivity, and unproductivity. Huge scores of students across the country still cannot register due to fee blocks and historical debt. On the other hand, others have completed their qualifications but cannot access their certificates because of student debt. We are a nation in crisis. If the youth of South Africa continues to be silent, even when our future is being destroyed before our eyes, we may never recover from this heartless and incompetent government. There is nothing new about the new dawn because all the old problems are still here and they are getting worse. In the so-called new dawn, youth unemployment is rising. In the so-called new dawn, there is no electricity. In the so-called new dawn, crime and gender-based violence is spiraling out of control. In the so-called new dawn, even prominent artists and public figures can be gunned down in broad daylight and nothing is done about that. If such important people can be killed so easily without any accountability, what about us, the ordinary people of South Africa, who are destined to be killed and forgotten in the townships? In the so-called New Dawn, there is drug and alcohol abuse, worse amongst the youth. In the so-called New Dawn, there is rising teenage pregnancy. In the so-called New Dawn, degrees are losing value because graduates are roaming the streets of South Africa without jobs and employment. In the so-called New Dawn, a sitting president can be found with illegal and undisclosed dollars of foreign currency under his couches and mattresses, and nothing is done about that. In this so-called New Dawn, food is expensive. Petrol is expensive, electricity is expensive, education is expensive, graduation gowns are expensive, rent is expensive, buying a house is expensive. In the so-called New Dawn, financing a car is expensive. In the so-called New Dawn, starting and running a business is too expensive. Worse for small businesses. Looking for a job is expensive. Flights are expensive. Buses are expensive. Sanitary towel for young girls are expensive. In this so-called New Dawn, even mjolo is expensive. South Africa, we must judge ourselves harshly for ever thinking that a greedy billionaire was going to care for anything other than profit maximization. We must judge ourselves harshly for trusting a mining gangster. We must judge ourselves harshly for thinking that a man who went from being a trade union leader to a billionaire overnight was going to put us first before profit. It is practically impossible. Cyril Ramaphosa will never love us more than he loves profit. He will never love the students of South Africa more than he loves profit. He will never love mine workers more than he loves profit. He will never love security guards and farm workers more than he loves profit. He will never love the youth of South Africa more than he loves profit. It is for this reason that the EFF Students Command will be joining and mobilizing the youth of South Africa to join the national shutdown, calling for the resignation of Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday, 20 March 2023. Campuses must all be closed on that day. Students coming from campuses which will be closed on the day must be redirected to the streets and the nearest national shutdown meeting spots. All campuses of the EFF Students Command must hold student imbizos to conscientize and agitate the student body towards the demands of the national shutdown. All EFFSC-led SRCs must, no later than Wednesday, 15 March 2023, which is tomorrow, release public statements in support of the national shutdown and conscientize the university community about it. All provincial student command teams must, no later than Wednesday, 15 March, which is tomorrow, hand out letters to all university campuses, all TVETs, informing institutions about the national shutdown. To call for a failing, incompetent and corrupt head of state is not a new phenomenon in South Africa. It's not a new phenomenon in higher education. When they did not want the former President Jacob Zuma, all university vice-chancellors and council chairs mobilized us to join a national shutdown calling for Zuma to fall. There is nothing special about Ramaphosa. Our institutions are not a faction of the ANC. In the same way they called for Zuma to fall, the same standard must be held against Cyril Ramaphosa. Students and youth must not be made to think that this shutdown is a festival of old people. Everything that happens in South Africa has a direct impact on our problems on campus. This shutdown is a reminder and clarion call to us that we have been too quiet as a generation. Our beds are no longer comfortable because every time we close our eyes, we see the thousands of students sleeping outside without student accommodation. We can no longer eat because every time we open our mouths, we are reminded of the many students who sleep on empty stomachs because they have been failed by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. As a continuation and inspired by the Commander-in-Chief, on Tuesday next week until Friday all week, all members of the Central Student Command team must descend to Pretoria to occupy the Department of Higher Education. All SRC deployees must be there. We have heard the cries of students across South Africa. Now is the time to respond. The whole of Gauteng must be there. All those who have been told they cannot register because of space must be there. All those who have been sleeping outside, sleeping in lecture halls and libraries must be there. No one must be sent back to the township and rurals by any institutions. All those who have passed matric and did not receive offers must be there. Blade must answer, NSFAS must answer. We are the future and majority shareholders of this country. We must never be cowards. We must never be narrow and think we will be students forever. The life of a student is a transition. Very soon we'll be confronted by graduate unemployment. Very soon we'll be confronted by drug and alcohol abuse. Very soon we'll be confronted by the problems of the very society we want to avoid. This national shutdown is about us. This national shutdown is about the youth of South Africa saving and taking control of our destiny. All young people from the Cape Flats to Thohoyandou must rise up and reclaim our streets on Monday, the 20th of March. To the bus owners, campus managers, principals and vice chancellors, if you want to be misled by the illiterate John Steenhuisen, good luck. If you want to undermine the frustrations of the youth of South Africa, good luck. If you want to belittle the plethora of genuine and sensitive concerns of young people in South Africa by continuing as business as usual, we say to you, good luck. No court of law, no police officer, no army will stop the will of the people. As declared by the Commander-in-Chief, the 20th of March is Freedom Day. Ramaphosa must resign. Ramaphosa will resign. Amasi abekwe elangeni. Ujingi uqhawukile. Amagwala kulonina. Woza 20th of March. Woza.